About the state of my health and why I'm producing less videos in general. I am perfectly okay. On one level, I've had less interest in producing videos because I've had less things to say. I've said so many things already that making more videos would just be repeating points I've previously made or stories that I've previously told, and I don't think that would be fun for very many people. Additionally, and I don't know how many times I have to say this because I've gotten so many comments asking about this for whatever reason, I am doing a lot better than I used to be in just about every way. In terms of my emotional health, relationships with other people, physical health, etc., etc. I believe the reason why people are so concerned is because I haven't been making videos. In the past, it used to be a sign of health for me that I would be making a lot of videos, not because making a lot of videos was necessarily even that constructive for me, but because I was so depressed that I needed to make videos in order to keep myself busy. Me making videos, for me at least, stood more as a sign that I was in a very bad place than a good place. Of course there would be times I would be so depressed that I wouldn't be able to make videos, but more so they were a distraction from the feelings I had, and I don't really use them as that kind of distraction anymore. On one level because I need them less, because I am not depressed anymore. I haven't been depressed for like 3 months or more at this point, and I've had things that have escalated or gotten worse that have made me sad in the moment, but being sad in the moment is not the same as being depressed, especially not chronically depressed as I was when I was making a lot of these videos. There isn't a reason for me to be producing content at that rate, anywhere near that rate, when I don't have ideas and don't have the same motivation behind making them. It's very strange to me that people say, hey, Star, I'm glad you're alive, or whoa, you're alive, or whatever, when I feel like you should have been more concerned for me being alive if I was producing a lot of videos. And I talked about this in the past as well. The reason I did it was in order to have a distraction from the immense amount of pain I was in. And so, I'm perfectly fine. Thank you to everyone who's concerned, but there's really no there. In general, as I said in my video, When I'm Wrong, Bring It On, things have been going way, way better than they ever have. As many trials and tribulations as there might be present in my continued journey towards better things and being a better person, I have a much better perspective on how I am going to change in the future and where things are going to be in the future as I try to better myself. And I've only been able to hone in on that perspective because of the fact that my general emotional health and hope towards the future has been so much more positively cultivated. So thank you to everyone who's worrying, but me making videos, or I should say not making videos, is more of a good sign than a bad sign. Also, remember that the person who is presented in these videos is a deliberate character. Or not even deliberate a lot of the time, it's just a character that I put on by nature of performing. The person who is on the screen is not going to be the person who you actually speak to if you spoke to me. They're two distinctly different people, and try to keep that in mind when you hear the things that I say that may concern you, or the way that I present a video may concern you. Because of the presentation in my last video, I feel compelled to come up once again in the same day, which is incredibly rare for content of mine. I mean, if you hear the way I'm speaking now already, I already sound significantly more coherent and professional than the last video, because I'm actively making pauses the moment that I think to say or repeat words of mine as I'm going through the process of thinking about what I'm about to say. This is something that I consciously did throughout most of my, well, okay, not most, but many of my videos, as I felt that the way in which I was being perceived would be integral to how well received the points I was making was I could have the best wording and presentation in the world, but if I didn't sound as if I was at least somewhat professional in what I was doing, people would focus on those social connotations, that they have certain implicit biases when coming towards. Now, the sounds in my house that I constantly hear all the time are distracting me and making it difficult to record this video. Another reason why I haven't made a lot of videos is because the walls in my house are incredibly thin, and I get very easily distracted or moved away from task whenever I hear things in the other room. There's pretty much just constant noise here all the time. It makes it very, very difficult, especially right now, to make anything. But the more pressing factor that I had been intending to address with this video, before we got off into the weeds there for a moment, is the fact that I simply do not feel comfortable producing these videos at this point. I haven't, I don't think, for nearly my entire quote-unquote career on this platform. And someone on my last video said that I was quote-unquote losing the plot, and I had attempted to explain the intentionality behind that video. In terms of style, it wasn't that different than my other videos, many of which I'm even more rambly in them, and I do so for as a stylistic choice, or to seem incoherent, to seem off balance, wacky, insane, etc. If you look at my titles and thumbnails, that's an aesthetic characteristic of my channel and has been for a long time. There's this certain obscurity and madness and aesthetic in producing things in a deliberately impenetrable way. Now, there's something I value about that, and those ideals that I have with making videos conflict with the broader goal I've had of being understood, of making myself appealing to people. And if you look at the year 2019, I made this video, Social Anxiety and YouTube, where I described how I had to release a video at the brink of exhaustion, because otherwise, if I released the video, I would immediately delete it or unlist it soon after having uploaded it, because I was scared of the reaction that I would get for whatever I said. I was afraid of not being understood on whatever I said. And this is a product of like long-lasting trauma that I had when I was very young, and also in school, that I don't think I can really fix this at this rate. Like, obviously I can and will fix it, you know, speaking in the broad sense of things, like years down the line. But as of now, when I try to produce videos, I can't seem to shake this feeling that, like, whatever I'm producing is going to be misunderstood and reacted to in a certain way by people. That's part of the reason why I've put so much more emphasis on scripted videos, because with the scripted video, I can tightly comb over each individual word that I'm using, and it's much more difficult to make me out as an insane person if the words are chosen carefully. I would prefer to be doing that, because at the very least then I can enjoy the craft of what I'm doing and not have to worry so much about people misinterpreting my statements or seeing me as someone who just lost their marbles, and therefore any personal thing I say is invalidated because of that. And it's difficult trying to reconcile this, because again, like, I enjoy the aesthetic of losing one's marbles. I have deliberately, like, honed in on that. It's something that I do, even down to how I'm choosing to speak at certain points, even down to choosing to have points be only very disparately connected, and speaking in a manner in which I am not, like, sounding coherent. But this is the difficulty, right? I can't seem to get rid of this performance anxiety. I used to be able to do live streams, and I have no idea how I emotionally repressed myself enough to be able to do that and not just fall into like rambling at myself and going I don't know what I'm doing, etc., etc. Like, how was I able to speak so clearly and concisely for such long periods of time and been able to engage with a chat that was often very misunderstanding of me? I developed that ability, even though I was clearly in pain for a lot of the messages that I got in those streams. It was just, I was able to brush them off in a way that at least looked sound for the most part. There's a few times when like I blew up at like 2 people maybe, but a lot of it, or maybe 3, I like, there was like specific people that would get a chip on my shoulder because of the way that they would present information and talk about things. It was in a very like unempathetic way. Fuck, I'm doing it again. There I go again. But like, I think it was more like the memories of the things that people said that would bother me would have more of a lasting impact than me reacting in the moment. I was able to suppress whatever I felt for long enough to be able to produce the stream, and then the things people would say would go on to bother me afterwards. And there's a lot of people who don't care about that. You know, when I say this now, it's going to act as like a reason for them to do it more. And I will say that these things don't have so much of an effect on me at this point, but they, on some level they do. In the sense that I felt like very uneasy since having produced that video. For one, because I talked about fairly personal things like, you know, issues that I have strong views on, that on a principled level I would like to present to the public in a manner that as many people as possible would be able to accept, namely gender dysphoria, psychoactives, this sort of thing. I engage with these topics in that video with the aesthetic and veneer of incoherence and insanity that have characterized, intentionally so, once again, many of my videos. And I wondered if that was the right decision to make. On some level, it was the only decision I could make, because I wanted to produce a video that day, and I didn't want to have to go through all of the hullabaloo of, you know, going over everything I had to say and writing notes and such. I just wanted to say things. But I can't seem to shake that part of me that gets scared and scared and scared when I consider who might be seeing it, what they might be thinking. It's always been a massive issue for me to imagine myself in the minds of others, to imagine the thoughts that they're having, to know that I exist there. And no amount of philosophical cope or explanation for these sorts of things has been able to shake that part of me. It's gotten lessened over time, but in some ways it's also gotten worse. And it seems like the longer I've experienced these things, aspects of these things untreated, the worse they've asserted themselves upon me. I mean, you could chalk it up to like the fact that a lot of the time the way that I deal with this is by repressing it. It's just by trying to quote-unquote get over it in the moment, because that's what people do. They say like, oh, don't be so sensitive to criticism. It's not that I'm sensitive to criticism. I've changed my views many, many times when people have respectfully presented an opposing view and given evidence for it. I've had to initially falsify some of my own feelings by taking a step back and thinking about them and considering, am I just feeling a thing and am about to, I was about to say ad hoc, but I don't know if that's the right word to use there. Am I about to justify whatever I'm feeling with logic? Because for the most part, I mean, well, not for the most part, this is just true. People are not logical animals. We are emotional creatures. We would like to believe that we're logical, but the things that we are thinking are a product of the emotions that we're feeling, and the emotional part is the part that is in control. You can make this less bad by introspecting a lot and exerting self-control over the things that you say, but that emotional nature is inherent. And I've tried to train myself as much as I possibly can to adapt my views based on new information, empirical data. And in part, this has been aided by the fact that I don't identify with a lot of my views anymore. Even views that I consider to be principles that I have to uphold, like those subjects that I mentioned previously that I was afraid of bastardizing or presenting in a less clear light, I do not identify with those principles as a part of myself. Them being attacked is not me being attacked. It's merely that I see those principles as something that I do have to uphold on a moral level because what I believe is true. And I see the effect of people not having good advocacy for those things, good optics in advocating for those things, even if it's like a 0.1% difference that's made upon the world. That's still a difference. That's still harm that's being caused as a result of you not being more careful with how these topics that are important to you are being presented. And imagining that harm is something that I don't really like doing because they are issues that I care about. People can insult me for having dysphoria, and they do, and for the most part I just brush it off because they don't really understand the issue. The things that they're saying in response to me are either a result of misogyny because they see someone who they've ideologically they they see themselves ideologically they've put a trans woman in the box of being a man. That's a conclusion that they've decided to come to based on the information that they've been exposed to for whatever reason. And so when they see someone who they believe to be quote-unquote a man transitioning to a woman, they see it as you're giving up all of this power that you have and just the inherent betterness to being a man. Why would you do that? And they react with anger or judgment or some combination thereof. And this manifests in the sort of strange behavior that you see of on the internet of people just heavily dunking, and that's something that you on some level you have to be trained into, because misogyny is not an innate characteristic of human life. It's something that is cultural. The cultural institutions above you have imparted these views onto you, and they've connected you with you for whatever reason. Perhaps you just have a poor vitromedial prefrontal cortex, and so you have large difficulty falsifying initial claims and are therefore more predisposed to prejudice and poor control over what you say, etc., etc. That's one reason why someone might be prejudiced, but beyond neurological problems that someone could have that are causing them to be a bit wacky. I think in general the bigger culprit is the culture that someone is raised in, and they're sort of justifying their emotions by taking these cultural signifiers that are okay for them to feel, that they've been taught to believe on some level, and then applying it to personal experiences they've had with people among that group, and almost looking for any reason that they can use to justify it. I guess the classic example is oh, black woman breaks up with me, therefore all black people are bad, and now I need to look up studies about how race and IQ is correlated or something, but that tendency to justify your feelings with logic because you believe yourself to be a logical being is very present in these prejudiced people. And in that specific case, it's your reaction to trans people is is the result of a misogynistic tendency. Another example is just initial disgust that people get from the idea. Maybe the only representation they've seen are, like comedy bits of like bearded men wearing skirts or something like that, which is just, I mean, I think you'd ask about anyone and they would think that's gross. But, the representation that they've received, or just imagining the idea, makes it sound gross to them. They're not very informed on the issue, so they don't know how feminizing the effects of medical transition are, and the various things you can do to aid that process in other ways. And, they see the person and or they imagine what the person is, and they don't really know how it works, and so they're coming up with a lot of preconceptions without information that are okay for them to have, because it's a gross person that you've had a gross reaction to the concept of, and now you're in the stage of justifying whatever feeling you initially had. This is why, if you look at people who debate on the issue of trans issues, you often see them having to take a moment to think about what they're about to say, where like they get asked a question that, if they answered it earnestly, it would, kind of deconstruct aspects of their worldview, and they have to take a moment to consider what justification they give after that. They don't see it as a justification, they see it as logic, but they have to think about it because it's not innate, it's just a feeling that they have that they need to explain. The other reason is like sexual insecurity. A lot of these people are just attracted to trans people, and they don't like that. They're afraid of being attracted to them. And there's various other reasons. I'm not entirely sure why I brought this up. Oh yeah, and so I understand why people have these sort of reactions to me, and they don't bother me, because I have an explanation for it. I think I, for the most part, understand. But on the issue of gender, on some level, anyone speaking about their gender and their experience with it are in and of themselves an advocate for that group. The effects that they have by speaking about their personal experience will ripple. If you speak about your experience in a very cogent and presentable manner, you may move people over. Or no, it's not may. You just will move some people over who initially had prejudiced views. I don't know how many people in my audience have been moved over who once had prejudiced views. I would imagine at least like one or two, right? Because the people who watch my videos tend to have a pretty strong connection, I think, at least based on the comments. And so, if you were reluctant about the issue and then saw someone who you think is cool that you like being one of those people, it's like, oh, maybe I should reconsider some of my thoughts about this, and then you become more open to learning about the thing. To this point, I see myself as a kind of advocate, just inherently, because in terms of utility, anyone sharing these experiences is, and there will be negative consequences on the world for having presented these things in a bad manner, in a way that's embarrassing, and there will be positive consequences on the world for presenting them in a professional manner, one that makes sense, one that's convincing. And I don't feel like it should be, or ought to be, my responsibility to convey myself in this way. I mean, I did release the video at the end of the day after all, but it's difficult to reconcile my desire to make weird content with something that I believe to be a fundamental principle, something that I have to advocate for in a manner that is professional, because I see the potential social and just social harm that would be caused by not. And so, even if it's such a small percentage, I always feel like on issues that I view as a matter of principle, I always see that I have to present them in a way that is good. And this was the other issue that I took up with that video, is because I was talking about my own experience with not wanting anything to do with substance use, and I was not giving the proper caveats for how I came to those mistakes and those conclusions, and how one, in fact many, do and ought to prevent them. you know, I was in a specific case where there were isolated instances like that, but for the most part, I was mostly responsible. Like, it's one of those things where, the way that the way that you present it is going to, it is going to have a massive effect on people. Because I think people are generally becoming a lot more open to the idea, and as someone who, on the principle of freedom, of people having autonomy over their own bodies, I want to advocate, or simply speak about the issue in a manner that is balanced, that balances the negative aspects of my own personal choices, my own personal experience, with empirical data that does show many risks, that does show social harm on some level, but also the fact that people can forge their own destiny despite these innate difficulties and complications that occur. There's data on both sides of the issue that come to that point, or come to those points, I should say, and by sort of meeting in the middle, we can find a more nuanced perspective that ultimately, you know, comes down to the individual's whatever like the individual is inclined towards. And so on an issue that like has that much nuance, where I have a particular stance, I would want to present the information that could easily be used against my point of view in tandem with the information that supports my point of view, because both of them have many valid claims, and I would want to show the reasons why I have the perspective that I have, despite the experiences I have and me personally not really being interested in engaging with those things, those substances, and like, you know, just talking about it from like a reasonable perspective. And I doubt anyone was like, you know, suddenly, anyone who watches my channel at least was, you know, suddenly like completely against the idea after seeing me talk about negative aspects of my personal experience. But like, it's sometimes I wonder, you know, who are the people who aren't commenting, who I don't recognize? What effect do my words have on those people? And so basically what I'm getting to here is that there are certain moral obligations that I feel the need to uphold when I'm speaking about certain topics that makes me feel a lot more uneasy when I release a video that is meant to be aesthetic and strange and wacky and unprofessional, versus a video like this where I think I speak pretty clearly. That's the issue here. Also, the more obvious, or I guess not obvious, but the more pertinent problem that I've spoken about more often, of being understood and making sense and having people react empathetically to the things that I'm saying, regardless of whether or not they agree with them. I could not care less about how much you agree with me. I only care about you showing respect and meeting my points in good faith, and not being condescending, which I mean kind of goes hand in hand with showing respect. But, you know, I can't expect people to be understanding or at least do those things. I guess that's really what I mean when I say understanding. It's just people being people being nice. I can't expect people to do that if I'm not presenting myself in a way that's appealing. And I worry about that. Because some of those people just aren't worth appealing to, of course. You're not going to please everybody, but there's a reason I've had panic attacks before releasing videos. I want people to be nice to me, and it's kind of a difficult thing to attain when you're a public figure on the internet. A lot of people aren't going to be nice to you, but I only want to be nice to them. So here we are with the future of my channel. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't particularly like making unscripted videos anymore. They just aren't very fun for me to do. Maybe I'll do some if I'm like traveling somewhere. And I like the written videos because I can have a high degree of control over the things that I say and the way that they're understood by people. Generally, it seems like people like those videos more anyway, even though there's a market for the very, very rambly, strange videos. So that's where my thoughts are at this point.